just in the nick of time. Oh, this looks... Haha, yay. All right. Syntropy in communities. It is, for me, actually quite a privilege to be able to explore communities, human ecology to the extent that I have, because if this was somebody's study field, it's the study of humans in communities, and that means that I'm kind of introspectively looking into people's lives. Well, I have been, and I have been quietly observing from the fringes many different communities across Australia, in the Caribbean, and in the Pacific, and also in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I did find a red thread through all of my questioning and questions and curiosities around human ecology, is that the red thread is that they all involve humans. And so that may sound like a bit of a denomer in a sense, but the beautiful thing about it is that the human journey and the human experience, no matter really what culture we come from or where we are on the earth, um, we're we're all humans. So I'm feeling really great to be able to present this presentation on a Eco-Sophie theme night, or also known as a self-study. Today, I'm going into the case study sharing on what I call syntropic lifeways applied in human ecology, how they function, and why they work. I also want to offer a truth bill all the way towards the end that basically states that other than our willingness, there are no saviors, heroes, or victims required to make community work. And we'll get to that, why I even put that in there. Today's presentation is about my case study of the Brave New Life online community, which is a community-based experiment, and I've named it such on various occasions to really explore, how do we do it? How does online community, how does online community, how does a sense of community really work? What holds it together? What makes it stick? And this is what I'm going to be presenting and talking around tonight. So I'm very, very happy to just jump right in. The Brave New Life community started out as an initiative between a collaborative desire almost between Imani Mamalushan and me, as we were relating very actively around the formation of community, how that would look like, and what that would be best and most optimally based around. And so I introduced Imani to feeling-based relating as a form to get really real with ourselves, and how that could be used as a template to engage meaningful communication in community settings. In the Brave New Life community, this became activated through what we call Zoom blooms, but Zoom meetings every week, where different members of our communities would all be welcomed in to show up, whether it was to listen or whether it was to share from feelings, relating around our own feelings. And as many would know, is that past year has been rather an interesting year that has offered a lot of opportunity to look at the world around us and look at our own lives and see what is working, what is not working, how am I feeling about all of that. Process of feeling-based relating, to kind of summarize that, is really about a process of remembering. It's restoring something that is innate and intrinsic to being a human being. And in that, it's really a process of re-enabling our human nature, because when we observe humans in their nature, it may appear that we are thinking-based creatures, but from my own observation and study, we are really feeling-based creatures. And there are very intrinsic needs that are existing in our human dynamics that really benefit catering to this need, creating a safe space or a container in which this form of relating is really welcome. I brought in what Imani beautifully coined the love language of syntropy, sovereignty, and self-love as a trifecta to kind of study nature through the lens of syntropy, which then allows us to also apply that onto human nature, which is our sovereignty, and how to restore both in in our own individual experience. The journey to that is through self-love, and that may be a short abbreviation of something that is much more, well, I wouldn't necessarily say complex, because it's all very simple, but it's not easy. And because there are no shortcuts in life, that it also is an ongoing process. And in this presentation, we'll link back into how these sort of human ecological lifeways are also traceable and witnessable in nature itself. As some of you may know, I am a little bit of a proponent of what I call cultivating a syntropic human ecology. I'm probably a singular proponent of she in this sense, because I was the one that coined it, and I think it's a beautiful template residing within that knowledge base about human ecology and applying syntropy to that, how we can cultivate that again. Anybody here may have heard or seen that there has been a course in syntropy, which included a lot of audio files, a lot of written language, which kind of has provided many people with a bit of a roadmap, but it's really just produced a sort of a different lens, a different perspective to look at reality through. And in my own experience, it's much more fulfilling and it's much more clarifying. And it is also capable of causing much more disarmament. Through the practice of feeling based relating, we have really fostered the restoring of lifeways of courage. And I use this word lifeways a lot because that makes them kind of in motion and living, as opposed to restoring the concept of courage. And in this process of encouraging people to find their courage to speak, we've been fostering real community as an intrinsic byproduct of that. We're encouraging everyone in Brave New Life to really create their own Brave New Life, to really step into that. And that has happened a lot through language, which has been the active speaking towards a vision, towards an invitation, and towards something more than what people may be navigating in now. And this has been something that has been engaged in actively within our community and has become a bit of a shared language, a little bit of a shared meme, stepping into my brave new life. As the community Zoom Blue meetings started growing, and at certain points we had like over 130, 140 people on a call, there was so much communication going on in the chat that it was almost like a chatterbox. And the growing need started emerging out of the community itself to have an online avenue outside of these Zoom meetings to engage. And so what happened is there was an emergence of a need for clearer ways to self-organize and communicate. And that was simply followed. And for that purpose, a build out of a online social media community hub where people can ask questions and share writings and share their feelings, join circles and create circles, was brought into being. And it's a beautiful, very simple kind of quote unquote Facebook style platform, but obviously it looks way more sexy, attractive, soft, and loving and kind and welcoming. I may be a little bit biased there. That space was really intended as a place for people to connect outside of the Zoom meetings, outside of the weekly recurring online engaging, in being able to see each other, hear each other. And so we were in that really empowering the growing of a community outside of the container that kind of started it. So we expanded our container. The platform was, and as I just shared, was envisioned to be about sharing our feelings, our stories, but also our resources, forming more circles, and therefore forming more opportunity for connections. We created in this way more ways to communicate and for more ways of the community self-organized to come about. And this was trialed and errored over the past year, and that community platform is still very much active and has some really beautiful content on it on a daily basis. People from the community are tuning in, commenting, responding, sharing stories, uh, just as one would expect from these type of platforms. It was really relevant to create opportunities, and in any community it is relevant to create opportunities for the community to be able to co-create together. And in my understanding, the best way to do that is to design self-organizing systems and to decentralize the control of the what you may call the community leadership. Because what the decentralization of that control does, it broadens the container and the scope, which allows a community to grow more, let's say, organically. And this is definitely something that we have followed with the Brave New Life community, Syntropy being such a common ground that has been circled around and relating things to nature. Now, one of the components that I know in community forming is really relevant is that you have a core, call it a core group or a quorum of people that are really at whatever individuated level invested and but also committed to showing up in a meeting form that allows for space to discuss things that is not part of the purpose of, let's say, the social media platform or these Zoom meetings that we had. So it's more of a strategic orientated group that started forming. And after that group formed, it became apparent for me in looking into the future that we needed to start making necessary preparations for what I call a planned succession. Now, we went through this process, and we went from the Brave New Life 1.0 to, in the near future, hopefully, a full scoped 2.0. And we did that through a process that is very unique, but it's also very relevant. I found through Brave New Life, our own community, something that I would call best practice in the field of circling, in the field of this form of communicating that we have developed in the community that we call feeling-based relating. When we plan for succession, it's really relevant that you select the best input. And I relate that back to Syntropic Agroforestry, is that you don't want to put industrial fertilizer on your arable land where you want to cause a succession to take place. You want to really get the best microbially rich inputs. And this been a total blessing, but also life kind of works that way. You create the gap for a certain quality of life meeting you, then that quality of life can indeed meet you in that space if you're consciously present with the facilitation process of bringing that in. In human ecology, in any community, what is so relevant and what makes communities stick and function and work is that there is a shared group journey. And so we took a large group, as I would see it, proportionately to all the people who are regularly on our Zoom meetings. We ended up with around 35 people over 3 different groups, over 3 different periods, over, I think, 3.5 months almost. We took different, how would I say that? Different turns at learning more about form and format. And without going into the details of what we all learned, what the purposeful function was in order to cause a succession to occur within this community. As I said, I believe very strongly in decentralizing the power or the control, but also really enabling and creating spaciousness. And what becomes created in a shared group journey is that more common ground, more interrelatedness takes place. The groups were smaller, but really because there's then a shared language that we based this training around, there's also a shared understanding which creates clarity of what our future forward meetings and circles would be looking like. In short, what these sort of journeys do when they're done with intention is that they foster more togetherness, more shared responsibility, and in essence, more ability for people to care for the wellness and the well-being of both the growth, but also the community quality. And there is a function in plant succession with purpose when we have a feeling that we want to kind of maybe scale community or we want to grow it. It's really relevant to notice that that is a different phase to enter into, and that life is a process to lean into that. And how do we navigate that with as much awareness as possible to get the best outcomes? Because you don't really want to go and do a shared journey that's a really crap shared journey, which kind of loses the interest of the group collective in the shared vision that maybe used to be there. So best practice really relevant. But in terms of this plant succession and the function of that with purpose was in this case to really empower each other to co-lead our online meetings, to increase confidence, clarity, and community cohesion. And these are relevant functions in human ecology in any community because they are really about empowering the community itself. As I said, it increased the ability to care, and there's an increase in the ability to self-organize because that kind of the invitation is put out, but also the empowerment is given that now we have shared and we are equal and in a sense in equanimity in that space because we all went through the same process. Decentralizing the ecosystem through establishing new circle facilitator functions is really what kind of happened. In this process ongoing, we continue to empower the self-organizing of the circles so that they don't have to have singular leadership. And in that, as a community of people, we're really navigating in common unity. And that is something that is in any community just really, really relevant to have as a value system or as a foundational premise around which and upon which the community is based. All of this grows and strengthens community resilience from the inside out. And a lot of people may think that if I want to grow community, I may just need to bring more people in, or I need to advertise, or a whole bunch of metrics are there. But if you have existing community, it is to work with what you have, and that's how it works in nature. If I would start out on this beautiful empty rice field behind me and want to start planting an extravagant food forest, the plants are only going to be able to work with what is in that ecosystem, unless, of course, I bring inputs into that ecosystem. But because we are dealing with humans and not so much mud and plant material, you can't just say, well, I'm going to grow this community, but I'm not going to use you. I'm going to just find other people to kind of put next to you. There is a togetherness required in any community. Now, there are some side effects of the succession process in human ecology. And in Syntropic Agroforestry, quite often there is a system reset that happens. And this seems to cause loss, attrition, and churn. And so, what that means, a reset means a heavy pruning in the system. And so that means cutting off all the branches, dropping them on the floor, cutting off all the leaves, letting all that biomass fall onto the forest floor or the garden floor, which makes it seem like we just all of a sudden lost a huge canopy, which we would call in customer retention attrition. And so we've lost customers. In community, we would call this churn. The membership, the people just stop showing up. These words are all interchangeable, whether we apply that onto nature or whether we apply that onto communities, and whether we apply that in business structures or in your local meetup, or whether that is in a Telegram group. Churn is something that shows up in all of those places, and there's best practice to navigate that best, and yet it's also inevitable. And what I'm wanting to speak towards, particularly in the second part, is that a lot of this is perception based. This is what a reset in the system looks in nature. And on the one hand, you could say, wow, these have been brutally butchered trees. Oh my God, this is, I don't like this picture. I want all the trees to look the way they look at the back. And initially, when I was introduced to Syntropic Agroforestry, I had a much starker and much harsher reaction to this happening to trees. But it's not so much what we think that is happening based on our programming, but really what are the results of doing this in the long term, and what can we witness? So imagine that there was a full canopy of all of this, and you look at the understory on the ground. Like, do you think that the little banana trees and the corn that we see and some of the taro and some of the other, there's some coconuts that have been planted, do you think that they would have been growing really healthily if the canopy was entirely covering the forest floor? And I could just give you the answer, no, they wouldn't. New growth requires sunlight. And so what happened in this heavy pruning is that sunlight was allowed to come into that space for a new cycle of life, through a process of reset, to come about, so that corns all of a sudden could grow again, which have a short life cycle, just like bananas that have a shorter life cycle than the trees. And what all of the pruning has done is that all of that was dropped down to the forest floor. This is kind of what happened in our reset. And our Zoom Bloom meetings have had a huge reduction in attendance. And that wasn't a surprise to me, because I know what happens when we go into planned succession. A lot of elements leave the system, and that's fine. Everybody's free to be who they are, and everyone is welcome. But in the process of training up this new cohort of people and decentralizing the organizing of our community structures of hosting these meetings, we've also become, as a community, really ripe and ready for what I call grounded growth and expansion. And so in a little bit, I'll go into that there is centralized leadership, and then there's decentralized shared responsibility. What we enabled to take place is that we have the capacity of the main function of the Brave New Life community, which are these regular Zoom meetings, to be facilitated by more than just my person or Imani's person or Shay's person, and that is done in a way, that distribution of so-called power is done in a way with a clear understanding that everybody knows what it does look like and what it doesn't look like, because we went through this training. Often, it's really too easy to look at what is not working. So if we're not aware that when we plan succession in communities, and these cycles in natural human ecology play themselves out in every online community, in every IPO, in every startup, in every new initiative that involves human activity. There is an adoption phase, there is the bell curve, and then it drops. But really, there are spiral dynamics that travel through communities because everything in life grows through cycles. For an 18-year-old to join, let's say, Brave New Life, which probably is not the best case example, that joins a gaming society, better example, to anticipate that 18-year-old at the age of 36 is still going to be totally hooked in that gaming society. A lot of people could say, nah, at some point he's gonna, find a girl and start a family, and he has got different priorities. And so humans grow through these cycles, and every community is affected by that. And it's relevant to know about that if you want to be in the quote unquote business of community long term, because if you're not in awareness that these shifts and these cycles take place, then and you don't plan for them with a sense of knowing what's coming, and when it comes, that you're not surprised. When we don't have that awareness, we're going to be surprised, and we're going to have maybe our spectacles on that is looking at what is not working. In my comprehension, knowing syntropy in nature allows us to know how nature functions naturally. And this is what happens. This is the same field a couple of months later. And so now we can see that the mango tree here is coming back, and the eucalypt trees is coming back. And really, all of the trees are actually all coming back really nicely. And some of the smaller coffee plants on the ground have actually grown up. And the corn seems to already have done its function because it's no longer in the system. So we're really talking about 3 to 4 months of space in between these two pictures that we're comparing here. And so if we know that this is what happens in nature, and humans are nature, or at least we can identify ourselves that we are also living, and that the same life strategies are also exhibiting themselves in our human dynamics, we can take this as a test case for reassurance. And of course, we still have to go through the process. We can't just decide to kind of all leave and then say, well, let's see if it really works out that way. A system does require continual participation because humans like to meet up, like to connect, and that is the purposeful function of this particular community that we are talking about. But the same happens here in this forest. All of these trees are talking together. All of life is in communication. Oh, we're going to go into the practices and the principles, which I call natural comprehensions, of what really works in communities, whether it's online, whether it's business, whether it's new initiatives, whether it's intentional communities. I've just sort of given a rundown as to what has been undergone and what has been the process of the Brave New Life community and where we are now. We're now in that stage of a regrowth being possible. Not the best graphic, but much better than the previous presentation. I'm going to go into the practices and principles of what makes communities really work. And this is something that you can all find out on the web. This is nothing new. This is very common knowledge, but it's very beautiful to bring it into this sphere. And I'm just going to go over them quickly. In communities, humans require a sense of belonging. They require to have or benefit having a commitment to being part of the community. And there needs to be communication. It needs to have a relatively flexible approach. There needs to be genuineness and authenticity. The community needs to be relevant. Whatever the community is about, it has to have relevance to the individual. But it also has to have relevance for the individual to belong to the community And so all of these elements are actually interlinked. You can cross them over. That in order to have commitment, you have to have a feeling of also belonging. And in order to have commitment, you can try and enforce that with a real flexible approach, which really works. I wouldn't necessarily go super flexible in more business orientated models, but all of these components are really relevant. Communities also need to have the ability to sustain themselves, that there is a future forward kind of confidence in the ongoing functions of community. Community development is really based on a similar six kind of aspects. And there's a common cause, there is cooperation and collaboration that takes place. There are strengths and independence that are being fostered and that are being developed and being invited to be embodied. There's equity and inclusiveness. And I really also see this kind of equality in that same sense. There's an active participation, because communities don't really function without humans being actively in participation with the cause of the community, or the calling, or the reason for its existence. And there needs to be community empowerment. Now, as you go over these elements that I just discussed, it wouldn't surprise me that some of these words you would find in the story that I just described about the Brave New Life community. And I did all of that prior to having these graphics on my computer. So finding this was a really beautiful acknowledgement of what we've navigated based on feelings, based on natural intuition, based on best practice, on what felt most right for the community in what it was based around. There are many beautiful experts out there, and one of them is David Mcmillan, that has really made his life work pretty much about community. And I personally find community one of the most valuable endeavors of um, exploring life here on the earth, because it's really shown me so much about me, but it's also showing me so much about what's possible for a better and brighter and more interconnected future for our human family. The sense of community is a feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling that members matter to one another and to the group, and that there is a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together. So beautiful. Oh, the graphics don't become any better necessarily. We have here four components of what are the core four pillars of community. There needs to be membership, influence, integration, fulfillment of needs, and shared emotional connection. And around that is a community boundary. And just to tie this back into the Brave New Life community, you could call that our Zoom rooms. That was the first community boundary. And then the community boundary kind of got expanded and encouraged to expand to become also an online social media avenue for people to connect. Outside of the email communication that we also have kept up and have really grown over time into what you would say an increase of subscribers to a mailing list. I'm briefly going to go over these 4 points just to kind of clarify them in real beautiful condensed wording. Membership is the feeling of belonging or of sharing a sense of personal relatedness. It's pivotal, it's foundational, it has to be there. Without that, it wouldn't be membership. Influence is that there's a sense of mattering, of making a difference to a group, and of the group mattering to its members. So there is the capacity to have influence on the outcomes, the growth, the direction, the quality of the purpose of the community. It's a beautiful, beautiful component because people benefit and really like to be able to contribute. And in our Brave New Life community, we have a beautiful metric for that. There needs to be fulfillment of needs, and this is the feeling that members' needs will be met by the resources received through the membership in their group. And yeah, that's just something to really take into consideration, that what are the resources that are being received by them being a part of that, and does that meet really their needs? So in that sense, we kind of have to be careful what we promise on the front end, because are we going to be able to deliver on that at a later stage? There needs to be shared emotional connection, the commitment and belief that members have shared and will share history together, commonplace, time together, and share similar experiences requires to be part of effective community designing. And what you may find in this little quote here, that they will share a shared history, or share a history, which is that shared journey that I spoke about, that through the process of this planned succession, we went through with a large part of our community that was meeting regularly online. Now, what happens next? We now know what is all required and what's all pretty much being ticked in terms of boxes within this particular community, but also what would be required to have awareness around to develop or grow community, whether it's physical, whether it's online, whether it's business. If you've gone through succession or you're planning for succession, what happens then? So the best way to approach that for my own sense of comfort is to just look at how does it happen in nature. Well, life is successfully wired for growth and expansion through the process of natural succession. And this is the outcome of what, in this sense, the Brave New Life community is going to be able to experience. New growth, new introduction of new species, new room. And it is beneficial to look at this promise, or this promising picture in this way, because it kind of indicates that it's going to all be all right, because nature comes back really beautifully with more life instead of what looked like a brutally assassinated landscape. And in human ecology, then there are very relevant things to be really in awareness of as we plan succession, or as cycles of change come through our ecosystem. And how does this then work in human ecology or online community? Well, I want to offer us a quick bio break. I'm going to have a sip of tea, and I will be introducing this new mentor of mine. Really love this guy. What a beautiful human ecologist, I would call him. But he's an excellent community consultant, and I've spent probably about 16 hours listening to him. And I don't do that with a lot of people. But he has a softness and a kind-heartedness, and really he has a super syntropic orientation towards communities and how they work, how they function, what works, what doesn't work. And the beautiful thing is that most of his comprehensions and most of the insights that he has gained over the years of him being part of communities is that it's all data-based, it's all research-based. He has done work with some of the major companies, as it's listed here. I don't know if you can see that, but it's Apple, Facebook, Google, to name a few. So not that I'm particularly interested to, base any model that I would want to, I wouldn't want to base my orientation on the mainstream, because we're trying to do something new and something that is brave and courageous. But because we're dealing with humans, It doesn't really matter whether it's a for business process or whether it's a total advertisement ecosystem that is tracking your every move so that it can sell you better advertisements so it can make more money. It doesn't really matter, because the, what makes any community tick is not robots. It is the human activity within that space, and really with that, it's humans. And so Richard Millington has a beautiful understanding of human ecology. And I'd love to pick up a conversation with him one day, because I think that he could be a transformational, inspiring leader in the mainstream, a leader of positive transformation and change. And he's already bringing so much about. So without further ado, and just one more sip of tea, these are some of the slides that I have included here that are from Richard. And Richard runs a company called Fever Bee. And instead of me trying to reinvent the wheel here, I'm just going to go over some of the 16 hours. And rest assured, it's going to be short and very quick. And what I would like to actually do is that if this really interests you, I would give you my cherry-picked videos and also some of the resources that he makes available. But best to just check him out yourself. It's called feverbee.com. The magic happens here. So you have a community, whether it's online or on land, but in this case, we're talking online. You have a potential audience that is not necessarily engaged. You have an interested visitor group. Then you have the experience internally in your community. And then you have that funny word called churn. And churn means it is the people who are on the way out. And then on the other side, you have the outside component, which are former members that are no longer part of the journey, no longer part. They've unsubscribed. They've, just haven't been showing up. And so where the focus is in this little rectangle box. And that's kind of what we're going to be zooming in on. Let's see. What determines the level of engagement in a community? One of the beautiful teachings that I really gleaned from Richard is that it's not so much about creating engagement in a community that's going to make a community really function. And that was very relieving to hear very early on in some of the presentations that I watched, because I was like, all right, now you got my interest, because it's a very traditional way of engaging community. It's almost like turning humans into statistics. How can we create more engagement? Because if we have more engagement, then there will be more. And if there's more, that's good, because that's what our community is for. And so there's a lot of kind of cloudedness in this online community development that really benefits being kind of pierced and seen through for what it is. And this is being dissected quite thoroughly. And as I've been talking, you've probably been reading some of the words here. Ensuring members have a good experience is obviously key in reducing the churn, and converting audiences into interested visitors is the key to growth. Well, and then there's the ways to do that. One of the fascinating graphics that in my research to make this presentation came in front of me, because I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm just trying to bring best practice into the picture, is what is called the community commitment curve. And I was like, okay, well, I'm using Brave New Life as a test case. So people either read or listen to a video in the early days, and they connect with the purpose. They read that. In any other ecosystem, they would do certain similar things. They would read a member's profile. They would look at some photos. They'd look at some resources. And then they join as a member, and they start reading some blogs or some forums. And, well, they may even leave a comment here and there. And then they start contributing to the forum. And, well, they're going to be messaging other members. And they even decide to upload a video. And you know what? They are actually good at writing. So they're starting to write a blog post. They're starting joining other groups to become a key contributor in the forum. And I'm seeing all of this, and I'm like, wow, I'm ticking every single box in the Brave New Life community with what I'm witnessing. Of course, this is not across everybody that is on our platform, but this is looking good. We have a community commitment curve, and I'm 2/3 up the way, and I'm seeing that these things have actually been carried out and are embodied in our community by other people. There's participation in live video discussion. I'm like, now that's interesting. That's what we started with. So we started nicely way up the curve. So it was a lot easier for people to kind of do all the stuff underneath it, maybe. Um, People have, and in communities, it's possible that people start leading a forum or they lead a live video discussion. They start attending events, they even start organizing events, they start to lead their own subgroups, and they even adopt leadership roles. And I'm like, this is great because we have enabled our community with those feeling the attraction to step into any of these spaces by creating the systems, self-organizing forms of that, for that space to become open. Now, what I found so delicious about Richard sharing is that he's so frank. And the reality of any of this beautiful articulation of the community commitment curve is that most members simply don't have the time, the expertise, or the motivation to do any of these things. And that goes for most members. And so to have a fantasy that everybody will do this is really setting a community leader or a community organizing really up for failure. Like if you want people to have adopt a leadership role, well, there is a journey that you have to that these people individually have to go on in order to really get to that place within themselves and within the community. Now, if most members don't have time or expertise or motivation to do these things, then how do you engage them? Well, one of the other things that, before going into that is really relevant, is that the last thing that humans want to be is metrics, really, in a system. They don't want to be necessarily a statistic. And if you really even call them members, it's almost like taking the humanness out of it. They want to belong, and that is part of membership. But membership is kind of like a encapsulating word for what that means, and that is that belonging to a group. And because members don't want to be metrics, we can research all the statistics of the engagement and what's happening and which topics are interesting and to kind of see where we as organizers need to put more energy. But we would be artificially kind of observing information that, in the cyclical patterns of themes changing, of discussion interest, that it may be out of season next month or next year. And so if we're going to base our metrics, so to speak, around what members do and don't do, we're going to find ourselves falling short a bit in really meeting the human needs. And so when we make things metric and statistic based, we kind of seem to be knowing what humans are all doing, but it is the outcome of human behavior, which then gets used to kind of drive human behavior, but it's modifying human behavior at the same time. The circle of success is something far more interesting to talk about. And this is something that Richard really lays out very openly and clearly what's relevant on the scale of what's bad and what's great. These can be different colors in different community aspects or in different community settings. But there needs to be engagement, customer support. There needs to be success in the community. There needs to be innovation, advocacy, and of course, retention. And there are many more slides that build in onto this pizza that make it a very intricate diagram. I just want to jump to what I feel is more, in essence, an obvious one. That it's a lot harder to build a community in a toxic environment where the competition is high, where there's maybe strict moderation rules, which nobody really likes. If you're really starting from scratch, it can be really challenging to start developing an audience and starting to develop people that, because there's a certain amount of people or activity that makes humans feel like, hey, this is valuable to other people, so I'm getting curious. But yeah, with limited resources, it can be really challenging to build a community from the ground up. A lot of successful community professionals or experts or initiators are simply working in very fertile environments. They have a high level of support. They have a low level of competition. They have very little risk, and they have a good audience. They have a good reach. And so these are like components that the Brave New Life community currently has in its ecosystem. There is engagement, there is support, there are, well, I don't feel threatened by Facebook or any of the other social media avenues. I actually think that they are a supporting factor. They're like our online social media funnels to kind of um, promote that there is another platform where it feels different, where all of you is welcome, and where your journey really is of interest of others. Now, one of the things that in online communities and even in shops or, yeah, really, again, this is human ecology. So whether it's a community in your locality, whether it's a cryptocurrency or a Telegram channel somewhere online, there's community there. Why do people visit a community? Well, there's many different elements that are making all of that up, but usually it's consistent of these components: internal experts. There's a way to socially interact and media exchange. There's documentation, and there's resources or shared articles. One of the core things that is really being pointed out in any community forming, in any IPO, in any new business, in any new startup, is that the onboarding experience is just super relevant. And most communities don't really know how to do that when they start from scratch, because they haven't really been at the game before. And so therefore it's really relevant to listen to people that are doing best practice in this. And there is a lot that doesn't work. And there's a lot to say for the best laid plans between mice and men based on what we think that we know. But in my own observation, I've personally, well, not learned the hard way, but I really see that this has been lacking in the Brave New Life community, the onboarding process. So as soon as I got this, I was like, all right, okay, good. I'll change all the welcoming emails and the sort of automated email sequence in order to have future people that join get not bombarded with 7 or 8 emails full of videos and podcasts and all the things that we as a community have already navigated, have shared experience around, and then we want to pass all of that on to a new person coming in, and it really just doesn't work. It just could actually be off-putting. It's like, wow, these people just think that I've got time for long emails like this. What unique value does the community offer? And there has to be value that is experienced as such for people to stay. And in summarizing and coming to an end on some of the key points that Richard, that my takeaways are from Richard's presentations and all the hours that I listened, is that it's really relevant to find a way for every member to contribute, for them to have an opportunity to host events, to volunteer, to lend a hand, to publish resources or templates, to share what it is that they're navigating, ask answers, answer questions, connect with new members, and collaborate on potential projects. Well, when I look at all these things, we have an existing ecosystem that has the capacity to facilitate all of those things, but in compromised ways. And so Brave New Life 2.0, in that sense, because most of what I'm relating to is either the Zoom meetings or the online social media platform. It's kind of put together in a way that we cover these bases, but it's not necessarily very easy, so to speak. One of the things that I feel that is so unique and is the core of our Brave New Life community is this circle, internal experts and the community. We meet in person, and there's so much beauty in that, which creates shared experience. It creates so much of what I've listed above in the quintessential foundational aspects of what constitutes effective and successful community development. One of my greatest takeaways from my brother Richard is to simplify my darn messages. And so I'm really taking that to heart. And gladly I've come to realize that I need to be more succinct in what it is that I really want to convey. If for new people it wants to be palatable, digestible, interesting, and a process that is drawing out their curiosity. So this is future forward, where Brave New Life as a community is going to kind of reside around in terms of its intention. Now, all of you is welcome, and your journey matters. Now, in closing, I want to go over some of the things that Richard also shared, is that it's essential to have biofeedback. Well, they don't call it biofeedback. They just, of course, call it a survey, or they call it checking in with the community. But I like biofeedback because it relates more back to the agroforest. Biological feedback. And it is really relevant to get that from the community in order to know which direction you really want to go. Like, I may have a fantasy of what I think is important, but if the community doesn't put any emphasis on that, then I'm really misallocating not only time and energy, but I'm really misaligning the future forward strategy of what the desires are of people that are contributing to this biofeedback process and the direction that it's steering in. So the community survey came about, and we had 100 people giving beautiful feedback that I'm still going through, because it takes a while to kind of diligently and not kind of get a little bit tired sometimes, because the format in reading it is not necessarily ideal. It didn't come out in neat, nice PDF the way that I had envisioned. But I'm going to list here some of the main components of feedback that really would be feedback that any community could get if it asked for it. And so getting this information from the community is really just kind of like the roadmap, the building blocks. These are the things that in 2.0 need to be included if we want to actually serve the community. Easier navigation, a clear vision and mission page, something that is concise, that is direct, that is a click button away. Oh, I want to know what they're about. We don't even have an about page currently. An easy to navigate news page where we can find the latest newsletter if we're not getting the newsletter, or if we're unable to stay up to date with the ongoing influx of emails that everybody is receiving. A community blog space, which means that people in the community that are writers have an opportunity to share their voice in a setting that becomes publicly witnessable, and they're seen as writers because they're gifted in that space. And we have so much talent. We have so many quote unquote experts in our community, as I highlighted in that little circle. A place for community events to be listed. And that is something that I envision as a place where community members can post community events effortlessly by signing up to become a community event organizer. And so in that sense, it's about creating the space and the opportunity to be able to invite people into doing those things. But all of that benefits then being done in easy to navigate avenues and with clarity and good oversight. There was a lot of emphasis put on courses that would be supported through Brave New Life, from home birthing, homeschooling, unschooling, to hemp workshops, to syntropic agroforestry, homesteading, to, oh gosh, there were so many beautiful suggestions made of what is of value to a community, and that it benefits really having a self-study component. Now, you would probably figure that eco-Sophie, self-study, Syntropian communities has obviously a place in this courses for BNL, Brave New Life, as a little placeholder for learning and self-organized learning. One of the things that was really articulated is that we need a better onboarding process, and we need a better donation system, and really we need so many more smaller things. Really great highlights. Now, one of the things in closing, and I know that I've been rushing through this, but I want to really try and stay close to time as possible. And how am I doing? I've got 4 minutes left in my time zone. Um, is this truth pill that I kind of wanted to deliver on. And of course, it's just a nice word that I like to include in my promotional material. They're going to be, oh, we're going to get a truth pill. Oh, how will Neo, will he take the red one or the blue one? Look, other than our willingness, there are no saviors, heroes, or victims required to make community work. Because humans thrive really best if we have a sense of equality. But really, what this comes down to is that a lot of communities haven't seen, and this is particularly the leadership, hasn't recognized that there, first of all, is such a thing as a trauma triangle. And the trauma triangle is there's a victim, there's a hero or a savior, and there's a perpetrator. And this triangle kind of plays out that there are many communities that form because of a big traumatic event happening to the community instigator. He lost all of his money and decided, well, I'm going to start my own crypto platform because I got done over so badly, and that's never going to happen again. But the reason that he starts this other thing is because of a perpetrator, and therefore he's kind of like the victim, but also plays the hero role. But when we have heroes and victims and perpetrators as part of our human ecology, we're in a centralized ecology. And as I have described what we did in the process of decentralizing Brave New Life, in the sharing out of the responsibility and its capacity to self-organize as a community, there has also been a dissolving of this hero narrative. And I would say I would have been the hero in the narrative, but I was also the victim. And there also was a perpetrator. And not that that was anybody physical, but that's just more of my own individuated journey that I've come to recognize that I really benefit for the sake of the growth and the holistic nature and future of community, but also really what actually is ultimately only going to work. Trauma triangle is unsustainable. It is not long lasting, because trauma triangle involves also talk of fear-based narrative. There needs to be problems. There needs to be something to point at in order to get people to engage or support. And this doesn't play out in all communities, particularly the resource-based communities, like in tech world. Trauma triangles aren't really part of the equation. But when we look at communities forming on land, most communities are seen by an outside world that doesn't really understand what these people are doing as sects or as cults, because there's always somebody that is the natural born leader. But how much is this natural born leader in check with him or herself to be in serving leadership and really be in service to empower others to step into their gifts, their talents, and really invite that in, create the space for that. And so therefore I say, for communities to work, there are no saviors or heroes needed or victims required. And despite that many communities do form with this kind of metric as part of their reason for coming into being, it is very healthy to have an awareness of this, that through the process of succession, we can transition out of that. And the decentralization and the self-organizing systems that are being designed intentionally and consciously and put into place will enable the community to help the community leaders to also transition out of the previous succession dynamics, which kind of brought into being the community. And it's just relevant to know about that, because communities can't scale and grow when there is, in our case, feeling based relating involved. It can't scale and grow if the coming together of the community remains solely based on one or two or three individuals. That is not a distribution. That is not self organizing. That's centralized ecology that is going to burn out and run dry. And I would say that although that would perform a function with purpose, if you know that that can be avoided, you can consciously engage in a process of planning for succession and designing that out in a healthy way. And I've given some of the insights on what to really look for. I'm going to come back into the room here, and I see that it's 1 hour and 6 minutes. I am totally delighted. I kept myself somewhat on time. And so I am going to close this off and bid you all farewell. Thank you for sharing this out. Thank you for researching this a bit more. If you want the feedback of the, if you want the feedback information that I described in some of the resources that I have available, you can just send me an email. You can send me an email to Syntropy at Sovereign Sharing. I'll just put that here in the chat. And then I will send you this series of links and videos if you're interested in really those nuts and bolts. And I've gone through some of the videos quite diligently, and I'm also open to relate around the actual content on how to do these online expansions and build outs in a way that they're going to be really functional and beneficial. I want to thank you for showing up and being here. I'm going to end the live broadcast. And for those that are with us here in the back room, just happy for you to stay on for another minute.